We are suddenly locked on Ducks. We're locked on the Pac-12 because we're locked on here with Spencer McLaughlin. And we appreciate Spencer dropping by to talk some college football. Spencer, what's going on?
We're finally here, Mark. Not everybody knows the dance and tut-a-tut that Mark and I have been doing for the last couple of weeks to make this happen. So I'm just fired up to be back on the channel. Thanks for having me.
Yes, we both did a double take when we, finally connected on the StreamYard platform here and saw each other and thought, okay, we finally arrived here because
We did it.
something sabotaged our schedule for one of us about the 18 other times we tried to get together in the last 2 weeks.
It was literally 4. There were literally 4 different instances. This is the 5th.
So, number 5. All right. Well, I'm looking at this transfer portal, and of course, it's only been running here for 2 days. And I just checked it out a few minutes ago, and it looks like every other player on there is coming out of Oregon.
Yeah. Keith Brown, Jalil Tucker, Trevin Maai, all in the transfer portal. Keith Brown, I think the most notable of the group there. And, this is just kind of the modern college football world, Mark. I think that's, all it is as it pertains to what this means for Oregon big picture. We can get into, if you want, what it looks like for, the position groups and playing time and all that sort of stuff. But fans just have to be ready for this stuff consistently, it seems now, where you're going to have pretty highly recruited, sought after, big time recruits. They're going to transfer, right? Depending on your perspective of the phrase big time recruits. But, Keith Brown flashed the potential at Oregon, never played consistently as a starter, but played regularly over the last couple of years. He's a 4-star linebacker coming out of Lebanon High School in Oregon. Jalil Tucker was a pretty highly sought out. Jalil Tucker was a top 100 player in the 2022 class. He's in the portal. He never really played. He only saw the field against Eastern Washington last year. Trevin Maai was not a big recruit. He's played the last couple of years, and I think Oregon can replace or even upgrade his production from the last couple of seasons. But this is just what it is now. If you're a program that's going after recruits that are in the 4-star area or top 100 area, if they don't play early in their careers, they're going to have options because of the number of relationships they form over the course of the recruiting process. And I think that's what you have here with Brown and Tucker.
And yeah, exactly. When you look at the transfer portal, and now that we've been through it about 3 to 4 cycles, you start to see a pattern, and that's one bucket of player. And it's intriguing to me to see a guy that's a top 100 to 200 player originally in his recruiting class who just didn't break into a lineup for a number of reasons. And then a lot of teams are going to be standing in line because of the relationships built during the recruiting class, the recruiting process, and then also just obviously because of the sheer talent, even though it's been unrealized to this point. And then you see that extremely productive group of 5 player who was lightly regarded coming out of high school, who's proven himself and now wants to take that next leap, probably make some money, develop himself for the NFL, play on a big stage, and make a move from group of 5 to a Power 5 brand.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of the give and take for non-traditional powers at the Power 5 and G5 level. If you're just talking about college football, and this applies, frankly, to basketball as well. It's a very similar conversation, but you're going to have guys leave who you look at and go, oh my gosh, there's nothing we could do as a school. We're in the Mountain West. We're in the American. We're in Conference USA. And our best player, we're in the Sun Belt, and our best player just got taken by a Power 5 school that could give him more money. Yeah, that's the one side of it. And that's frustrating for fans. But then there's the other side of it, which is you have guys who are highly rated recruits coming out of high school, oftentimes for a reason, right? Some guys don't work out, but most of the guys who get that sort of rating, it's not by accident. If your composite rating is, over 94, 95 on 24/7, there is some identifiable trait that is leading you to get that sort of recognition from scouting experts. And so you will have guys who don't crack the lineup at the Power 5 level, who might not be able to find a Power 5 home and are just now looking for an opportunity to play. And then those guys go down I think it's more common in basketball, but I think you can see it in football as well, where a guy who's capable of playing at the Power Five level and being a rotational player, a good solid player, he can go to the G5 level and he could shine. He could be an all conference caliber player, right? You think about, a guy like Matt Bradley at San Diego State just led the Aztecs to the national championship game as their leading scorer. Well, he was a good player at Cal. He was on a very bad team, but he was thinking about getting out of basketball. And he talked about how Brian Dutcher, his head coach, talked him into coming to San Diego State. It, of course, worked out for both parties involved. And I do think there are more tangible examples like that in the college basketball realm. But I think for football, it's still very much a thing. Oregon's had a lot of players over the years that were four-star recruits coming out of high school that, played some, but not a lot. And they ended up transferring over to Nevada. I look at a guy like Sean Dollars at the running back position. That's a guy who, when he played for Oregon, was on the field. He looked good. He looked like he was a starting caliber player, probably could have been, but the coaching staff had other ideas about, where he stood on the depth chart. So he goes to Nevada now, and he's a guy who I could see being, an all Mountain West caliber running back because he has those sorts of traits. And that's a player that you're attracting to the University of Nevada football program that otherwise is not going to be there from an athletic standpoint, coming out of high school. So that push and pull, it can depend on the year, in terms of whether or not a program is getting a net benefit or a net drawback on their roster. But those are the two doors, right? It swings both ways, I think, for the non-traditional powers in college sports. And we all know once the can of worms got open, they can't put the lid back on it. Like, Pandora's out of the box. This is what college sports is now, and some fans will resent that. I get that. I really do, because you form some sort of attachment to a player, then he just ends up departing. You're like, well, why am I getting emotionally invested in here if these guys aren't emotionally invested? I understand fans who feel that sort of frustration, but this is the world we have now.
Yeah, well, fans are fans in regards to not necessarily being logical about the situation. But one of the reasons why college football, college sports, athletics across the board thrive is because there's an emotional investment from the fans. If there were
Right.
no fans, there'd be no college football.
Right.
So maybe the players, I don't think it's ever going to come to this, but if the fans would start to make business decisions like the players do, then then maybe the sport would cease to exist. But
Yeah.
anyway, that's a long
Well,
conversation.
I think, just real quick on that note, there is an element of consistency. People say, oh, like, oh, you would feel, if you got this opportunity or if you got this job, you would move and you would do this sort of stuff. In the fan space, at least in my experience, Mark, if you were a fan of one team and you quit being a fan of that team and you went somewhere else, or you hopped on, the Warriors or the Yankees bandwagon back in the day or something like that, you get ripped in the athletic community amongst fans, at least in my experience. So to me,
Absolutely.
that
Yeah.
that's a consistent, generalized theme in sports is we do appreciate some inherent level of loyalty, and that has now been reduced for some players, not all, not even most, but that has been reduced at some level. And it's easy for people to get frustrated because there's just, I think, something about human nature that makes us want to be, loyal to a particular cause, right? And fans are probably looking at it saying, well, we're loyal to the team and we root for you in the good times and the bad, and we're optimistic, and we pay for tickets and buy merchandise and all this sort of stuff. And then when it's not reciprocated and they get frustrated at that, I don't hold it against them. I don't feel it as strongly as some people do, perhaps, but I understand where they're coming from.
Oh, I absolutely understand it. Now, you took it down a road that I wasn't necessarily thinking of. I was just thinking about engagement and attachment to the sport, period.
Oh, yeah.
Anytime people start to complain about, whether they complain about ticket prices or salaries, and I'm taking this now to the professional level, but certainly much of that is seeped down into the collegiate ranks. The fans hold the power ultimately. They just can't organize, or it's extremely difficult to organize to display or wield that power. But if Major League Baseball stadiums were empty for the first week of the season, then I think the point would be taken by all that the fans hold the power.
Yeah, I think that point would be taken, or that we're in the midst of another once in a century pandemic. Those are both apparently plausible explanations for why an entire arena could just be devoid of fans for a game. But yeah, I think that gets lost in the shuffle sometimes when people look at fans and say like, oh, well, why do you feel like you have a say? Why do you feel like you have an interest? Because fans are part of the, like you said, like without fans, this doesn't exist. This doesn't happen. If people don't watch on TV, there's no way to make money. If people don't go to the games, there's no way to make money. There's no sense of support. Like, I don't think these guys would, a lot of them would go out and play if it was just in front of empty stadiums. Like we did that for a year. I watched it. It stunk. I never want to do it again. I never want to see that sort of stuff. So I tend to side with fans in these conversations.
Yes, they definitely they're amazing athletes. There's no question about that. God has gifted them, but their skill set has been created by society. It otherwise has no worth or no value to it.
Yeah, because something is only valuable if you can monetize it, right? Like that's the inherent meaning of the term valuable. And there's a shifting definition now in college sports for what that actually means. Where does the value come from? It used to exclusively be you will be able to receive an athletic scholarship and go to college for free, which is otherwise a very expensive endeavor. And now there's a different component to it. And some people, don't like that stuff. I'm not as hard on the NIL space just because it's been going on for a long time. Everybody knows, like, oh, now it's just about how much you can pay the players. It's always kind of been about how much you can pay the players at some level. There's more of it now, but we're just seeing it, right? It's just kind of risen up to the surface a bit. Like, yeah, well, we'll just put this money in a collective instead of some kid getting handed a paper bag with wads of $100 bills in it. Like that's basically what that shift has been. I've long said that the portal is far more impactful in college sports than NIL, and I don't. It's kind of close, I guess, but I definitely think the portal's got a bigger impact.
Well, I do think as we go along, and it's still pretty early in the process, we're about 3 to 4 years, less than that, even into both, that at some point somebody is going to start to put some metrics to this to enlighten some people, enlighten all of us to exactly what's going on out there, and get a better feel on the numbers across the board, just similarly to 10 or 15 years ago when there were way too many early entries into the NFL draft, and the NFL cooperated with college football and started to put out a player grade that was put together by player personnel directors that then gave a draft grade, and there could be a more informed decision on early entry into the NFL.
Yeah, and I think that the NBA and college basketball don't do as good of a job of that. I can think of several examples just from Oregon, right, without knowing, a bunch of other schools. Although I can think of, I think Shabazz Muhammad at UCLA was a good example. Like these guys come in with a lot of potential, a lot of prospect, and they show this stuff in the college game, and they decide to go into the NBA draft, and it's just easy to look at and say you're not ready for the NBA. And I understand the appeal of going, and this is where I think NIL could actually be a good thing, is when you have a really good college basketball player who could be a guy in the NBA, but maybe isn't quite ready for that. Before NIL, I think he would have looked at it and said, well, I just want to make money, whether that's here, whether that's overseas. I'm just looking to make money. A lot of these guys have girlfriends, fiancés, wives, starting families, all that sort of stuff. They might look at it and say, I need the financial component. And that's why they'd go to the NBA. But now that NIL is there, you can stay in college, you can work on your game, and that makes you a better NBA prospect when you do enter, and actually increases your long-term earning potential. A guy like Kenny Wooten or Jordan Bell or Lewis King for the Ducks, I thought went into the NBA draft on what I can pretty fairly say now was some bad advice at the time, because they were getting told by somebody that they'd be able to make it, that they'd be able to have, these big time careers and whatnot, when it was clear there was an element or two of their game that needed more refinement. And had they stayed at the college level, it would have been, in my view, beneficial to them in terms of their long-term NBA prospects. And I think that guys overlook that because we always tend to think in the short term because it's really easy to, because I do have a personal saying just in my everyday life, like I got to get through tomorrow first. And someone will say, what's tomorrow? I'm like, I don't know. I'm gonna wake up and find out. Like I don't know what's coming tomorrow and whatnot. So I think there's, yeah, I do think the NFL does a good job. I think the requirement of staying for 3 years in college is good for the NFL, number one, because it allows them to draft guys who are actually ready to make an impact. Whereas in the NBA, you take a guy number 3 overall and you're like, oh, okay, he'll be an all-star in like 4 years because his game is just so wildly underdeveloped compared to what all the potential is. I would love to see a 2-year rule in college basketball. I think that would help the NBA, and I think it would help college basketball, because if you had a guy there who is a big time star and he had to come back for a second season, I think that helps you grow a greater affinity to the team when you can have those players to kind of grab onto. And some guys do end up staying, but it's increasingly rare. And so I've long wanted to see college basketball do that. I don't know that is particularly imminent, but I think it'd be an interesting concept.
Our basketball quota of discussion is about 8 seconds per year here at the Voice of College Football. Spencer, you've taken us
My apologies.
into the future for like the next 3 decades. We will be boycotting all basketball talk here for about 30 years. No, that's fine.